Hello, everybody. So today I want to talk about Oscar, a stock that is all over the internet. Everybody's saying it's the next 100x, etc. Well, I have my thoughts about Oscar, so let's get started. Oscar went up a lot over the past 5 days, plus 32%, and of course, price performance is also advertisement, and so everybody was talking about Oscar because Oscar did very well. The stock popped. The stock popped based on a Medicare Part E proposal from some lawmakers, some pro-Medicare lawmakers, where they would create a sort of a Medicare Part E, which is kind of like the big dream of the Democrats or something like that. Anyways, I don't really understand it all, but I know that Oscar would potentially have a much bigger business, a much higher total addressable market if Medicare Part E were to pass, and apparently it was in the bill. So this is why the market got very, very excited. But to me, the main risk still remains. And the main risk is having your customer rely on the government subsidies. And the main customer of Oscar right now is the ACA customer, the Affordable Care Act customer. And they benefit from higher subsidies that have been introduced in the prior administration that are set to expire on December 25. And it's a binary risk because nobody really knows. I mean, I have no idea what the new administration is going to do with the subsidies. I'm sure some people follow it much more closely. People who are much more politically inclined than me, who follow this stuff very closely. I'm sure they know and they can read into Trump's mind and into the mind of the lawmakers. But to me, it's still a binary risk. I have no idea whether the extra subsidies are going to be expanded or not. This is a business that relies heavily on government subsidies, and so did Enphase, right? And Enphase did not go too well. Thank goodness I sold it in the 70s, but Enphase didn't do too well because just with a stroke of a pen, the subsidies can be changed, removed, gone, or they can be added. They can be added and increased, and in that case, a stock like this thrives. But you see what I mean by a binary risk, and so this is why, because it's a binary risk, you're gonna have cheapness in the valuation. It's so the risk is gone. In my opinion, it's not gone. In my opinion, right now there's a lot of hype around a possible Medicare Part E, but to me, in my opinion, the risk is not gone. The uncertainty remains as to what the subsidies will look like for the ACA, which is the biggest business. The Affordable Care Act subsidies is the biggest business of Oscar. The question mark is still there as to what those subsidies will be after December of 2025, and so it's tough to have a good idea of what our revenue growth is going to be. So, because of this high uncertainty, Oscar is very cheap. It's trading at a 0.044 on enterprise value over gross profit over revenue growth. It's actually about as cheap as HIMS ever was. In the very early days of HIMS was this cheap. This stock is as cheap as HIMS was in the early days. The rule of 40, I wouldn't pay too much attention to it right now. It's not very good, but they are working on increasing their profitability. They have goals, they have targets. To me, I care about EBITDA margin is positive, and when I look at Oscar's EBITDA margin, it's 2%. It's positive. That's what I care about. Let's focus back on the top line growth. The top line growth is the most important. And again, that is all dependent on how much subsidies there's going to be. And if Medicare Part E is put in place, that's going to be a lot more for Oscar. At least that's my understanding of it. But the key difference, if you were to compare Oscar to HIMS, for example, I'm a big HIMS bull on this channel. The key difference, of course, is that HIMS relies on 1 million plus subscribers paying $56 a month, and so you have millions of subscribers who need to make a decision to cancel in order for the business to be hurt, right? In the case of Oscar, that's not the case. In the case of Oscar, for the business to be hurt, just one small group of lawmakers can stall growth and can hurt the business. And, one meeting somewhere can hurt the business. It's much tougher for HIMS to imagine have 1 million customers meet and decide altogether to stop paying the subscription fee to whatever pill they are getting through the mail. And so that's a key distinction, which is why I think, for example, a stock like HIMS should trade at a premium to Oscar, and it sure does, right? HIMS is about, on my valuation framework, HIMS is about 3 times more expensive than Oscar, but it's because you don't have that overhang in the revenue. And, I want to give kudos to kudos is due. For Oscar, they are trying to get into this ICRA, I guess if they pronounce it ICRA, Individual Coverage Health Reimbursement Arrangement. So they're trying to disrupt, I guess is the way you could say it, or they're trying to go after the traditional group. If you work in the United States, you may know you get your insurance card and you have a group number, and it's like negotiated by your employer. Your employer negotiates it for the entire employees. And these groups, these medical groups, they take a while to set up. They have issues with premium, they're expensive, they get more expensive. The employee has to participate, but the employer also has to participate. It's the same plan for everyone. You can't really choose a lot of plans. There's paycheck deductions, and the ICRA appears to be a better solution that Oscar is pushing. And of course, if Oscar were to say expand into kind of a hybrid employer-paid plan, if Oscar were to expand into that, well, that would give them some revenue that is not dependent on the ACA footprint, as they call it, and then the SACA subsidies upside. You can see this is their 2027 opportunity. So this is how they see it in the next few years. They still see 4 million because of enhanced subsidies if they are renewed in 27 and 26. They see an extra 4 million right here, and 6 million for the market, for the lives, total lives covered, right? They see an extra 4 million lives if the subsidy is covered, and the 6 million, that's what they hope to get for the ICRA. I think mostly the ICRA is what they hope to get. So kind of this hybrid, perhaps a smaller employer would offer that. And so if you go into employer pay, well, it's a business that is not as dependent on the government. But you see, this is where. This is why I love HIMS. This is why I'm so bullish on HIMS. This is I think the problem here is that the ICRA plan, for example, if you look at the plan, for example, Rebecca here, she has type 1 diabetes, very rare. Anyways, if you think about the plan here, it's $300 a year for instead of $1,200 a year. The point that I'm trying to say is that tech at a company like HIMS, but not just HIMS. There's plenty of competitors to HIMS. Tech. Automated warehouses, automated pharmacies, AI. To me, that's just going to be the full cost without insurance. Eventually, a lot of the pills are just going to be so cheap that I think insurance is not going to be that valuable. We're going to have catastrophic insurance. Catastrophic insurance is always going to remain a thing, in my view. But the teeny tiny thing, you got your diabetes and you got to get your metformin. This can be entirely disrupted by technology, by AI, by these websites, these apps, these platforms, just making it so cheap that you don't even need to use your insurance benefits. And so I think that's the next stage of a disruption. Granted, for now, we're in this hybrid era where I think Oscar makes some sense. But, and by the way, of course, they pride themselves on being a customer-centric company. They pride themselves on having great operations, great AI. And, this channel, I would never cover an old world legacy stock who doesn't have great technology. And I would never cover a stock who doesn't hold customer service as, kind of their North Star, the most important thing being the Net Promoter Score. This is a 21st century company. So they get a check mark on both of these. Technology check mark is great, and Net Promoter Score is great. I would expect no less from a company in the 21st century. So in my book, they don't really get a credit for that. They do get a credit for trying to expand away from the subsidies and trying to get into employer coverage and kind of disrupt the traditional group system at employers and offering kind of a employee by employee contribution in the form of ICRA, Individual Coverage Health Reimbursement Arrangement. That's they get a kudos for that. So let's move on. Let's talk about the takeaways. Let's talk about valuation. The valuation is too cheap to ignore when it comes comes to Oscar, and it's too cheap to ignore, even in a risk that I consider binary or mostly binary, right? What if there's a big cut to the subsidies in December 25? What if we find out they cut the subsidies big, right? To me, that's a binary risk. But even then, it's still very, very cheap. It's a 0.04. You know, I only have, I think, 3 or 4 stocks on my spreadsheet, more than 200 stocks. I only have 3 or 4 that are trading under 0.05 right now. So that's how cheap this stock is. But on this channel, which one is my primary binary risk play, which I've covered a few times, and people make fun of me, and that's fine. It's the placenta, the placenta play. My stem cell / placenta play, wound care play is BioStem. BioStem is my binary risk play, because BioStem is in a very similar situation where in December 2025. Actually, I think they'll find out in October or something. They'll find out whether they are on the list or not on the list. And if they are on the list of the CMS, they keep getting the reimbursement, and it's a party for a few more years. If they're not on the list, all of their customers are just going to be the private pay clinics and situations, and then the revenue is going to drop, and it's not going to be doing too well. This is kind of the same as Oscar. If Oscar gets the subsidies renewed, and if Part B passes, it's a party. The revenue is going to go up. But then if in late December, for some reason, the subsidies are gone, or Part E doesn't work, or the subsidies get dropped, or there's some sweeping changes, then it's not a party anymore. The revenue goes down. You're dependent on something binary. You're dependent on something binary. But I think all in all, if I look at these two stocks in these two situations, like I said, my play is BioStem. I prefer BioStem. On this one, I think it's much cheaper, and I kind of have to trust my process and trust this spreadsheet. But I also think that there's a reason why Oscar, being such a binary risk company, there's also a reason why it's more expensive than, say, a BioStem. Why is it more expensive? Well, BioStem, for example, is OTC only. You can't have it at most brokers. Oscar is available at most brokers. Oscar has a very nice margin requirement. I wonder how they managed to get that, 35%. You can borrow against your Oscar, right? You can't borrow against the BioStem. And of course, the house that you can get a mortgage on is going to be a more expensive house than the house on which you can't place a mortgage. This is the same for stocks. This is a marginable security. It's going to be a little more expensive than a non-marginable security. And then they have a superb and active options chain. And this is where, and I think a lot of traders do that. This is where you can set up a really interesting binary play with options. Out of the money 2027, January 2027 options out of the money. You can set yourself up a little asymmetric play where, okay, well, you could either lose everything or you could do a 10x, but your odds of losing everything to a 10x is like a 50-50. So you're looking at a 50-50, but in one situation you lose everything, the other situation you do a 10x. So if you actually calculate the expected value, you have very high expected value on the trade, if that makes some sense. So you can use options to make Oscar even more binary, and you can't do that on a BioStem. And so I think the market is somewhat efficient on both of those, to be honest, because I know people are very excited about Oscar right now. And Oscar is becoming a hype stock, so that's another aspect that a lot of people are thinking. Well, if Oscar becomes a quote unquote hype stock, if it becomes a hype stock, then in that case, the valuation, the multiple is going to increase. The multiple ratio is going to increase. We're going to have a 10x upside based on multiple expansion. Well, yeah, sure, but that multiple expansion is also not my type of investing. I look at revenue growth. So anyways, I could be interested in Oscar. Frankly, I think right now the business is fairly priced considering the risk. I think a lot of the rise that we've seen, the plus 30%, I think a lot of it has been driven by hype. And if there is a pullback, because we don't know, bills change all the time. If a bill changes again and there is a pullback, I might be interested in stepping into that one. And of course, I update everything on Patreon. And if I step in, there will be more videos about Oscar if I step in. But for now, staying on the sideline, one of my big binary bet is BioStem. So anyways, this was not financial advice, not investment advice. This is only entertainment. I'm hoping you were entertained. Please like, please subscribe, follow me on Patreon, follow me on X. Thank you for watching, and have a wonderful, wonderful day.